At the age of 20, I became the wife of Eli Baylor, though in retrospect, the fractures in our relationship had likely formed long before the ceremony. At the time, however, I was blind to them. Within our community, every minor detail was scrutinized. The reputation of an individual, and especially the collective standing of their family, was held in high regard. A single lapse in judgment could fuel local gossip for an entire season. I had been raised on the conviction that truthfulness was a person's most valuable offering. My father had impressed upon me that sincerity stands on its own, and my mother consistently reminded me that living without secrets makes the burden of existence much easier to bear. That was the philosophy I strove to uphold. When Eli first began his courtship, the community was entirely supportive. He came from an honorable background, was diligent in his work, displayed devotion in church, and carried himself with a quiet demeanor. Or at least, that was the reputation he maintained. During our time together, I noticed he had an unusual habit of constantly asking questions. I initially interpreted this as a sincere desire to understand my history, my childhood, my friends, the literature I enjoyed, and the places I had traveled. I viewed it as a sign of affection. It took time to realize that he rarely shared details about his own life, preferring instead to act as an interviewer of mine. One quiet evening, as we traveled by carriage under the stars, he asked if I had ever concealed anything of significance from my parents. I gave a light-hearted answer in the negative, but he pressed for a more absolute confirmation. Though the discussion shifted, I couldn't shake the feeling that his inquiry wasn't driven by simple curiosity, but by a process of investigation. As time went on, this pattern intensified. He would probe into whether I had ever violated the Ordnung, whether I had been dishonest, or if I had ever kept secrets from the elders. Individually, these questions seemed harmless, but collectively, they felt like a methodical search for something hidden. When I voiced this to my sister Ruth, she suggested he simply wanted assurance that he was choosing an honest wife, and I accepted that explanation to quiet my concerns. The weeks leading up to our wedding were a blur of sewing, cooking, and hosting guests. Just days before the ceremony, Eli made an unexpected visit to our home and requested a private meeting with my father. They spent nearly an hour behind closed doors, emerging with somber expressions that left my father looking bewildered and Eli looking content. I tried to ignore the growing unease in my gut. The night before I became a wife, my mother sat with me in the stillness of my room. She spoke of the beauty of kindness and the importance of honesty, telling me that I did not need to strive for perfection. Her words were a comfort as I faced the transition into married life. The wedding day itself was a beautiful, exhaustive affair, marked by the prayers and company of our extended community. By the time it concluded, I felt a sense of relief and optimism, believing I was embarking on a new chapter with a man who valued integrity. I was entirely unaware of how those very values could be distorted when suspicion takes root. Once we were alone and preparing for our departure, the questioning resumed. He circled back to topics I had already addressed, his tone lacking any warmth. He claimed he just wanted to be sure. The following morning before our departure, he insisted on reviewing my personal belongings and family records. It was an unconventional request, but wanting to prove my openness, I complied. He checked every document, then checked them again, scanning for any inconsistency. As he finished his double inspection, he seemed almost disappointed to find that everything was exactly as I had described. It was then that a haunting question took shape in my mind. If a man cannot accept the truth when it is presented, how much proof will he ever actually require? I told myself that early marriage often involves some friction as two people learn to coexist, but the reality was that my home felt less like a sanctuary and more like a space where I was being monitored. My every move was catalogued. If I spoke to a neighbor, he demanded a report. If I offered too much detail, he suspected fabrication. If I offered too little, he suspected deception. I began to walk on eggshells, realizing that suspicion creates a cold, stifling environment where even the simplest truth begins to feel unstable. When Ruth visited one afternoon while Eli was working, she immediately sensed my exhaustion. I admitted that I felt constantly examined rather than protected. Ruth offered a profound piece of wisdom. Trust is not built by auditing someone repeatedly, but by choosing to believe them once. Even then, I tried to excuse his behavior, wondering if he had been warned that young brides were prone to carelessness. But everything reached a breaking point one Sunday when I briefly greeted a childhood acquaintance named Samuel King. The interaction lasted less than a minute, yet it sparked an interrogation from Eli that lasted the entire journey home. He demanded to know every detail of my past relationship with the boy, refusing to accept that there was simply nothing to tell. The next day, Eli went to speak with my father, convinced that he would uncover some hidden truth. When he returned, having heard the same story my father and I had already told, he offered no apology. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't just losing my sense of peace, I was realizing that I couldn't sacrifice my dignity to appease his paranoia. A wife should be a partner, not an object to be audited by a man haunted by his own fears. The ensuing months were a struggle, not because of the hard work inherent to our life, but because of the emotional toll of living under constant judgment. During a later visit with my grandmother, she noticed the weight I was carrying. When she asked if my husband truly trusted me, I confessed that he didn't seem to know how. She shared the secret of her own long marriage. Her husband had chosen to trust her before she had even earned it, and that profound act of faith had inspired her to spend a lifetime proving herself worthy of it. Her words gave me the clarity I needed to address the issue directly. That evening, I sat Eli down at our kitchen table. I confronted him about his endless investigations, his questioning of my parents, and his search for secrets where none existed. I told him plainly that this wasn't about my past. It was about his fear. He didn't argue. He sat in silence until he finally revealed the source of his trauma. His own mother had betrayed the trust of his family years ago, leaving him with a deep-seated belief that he had to be hyper-vigilant to avoid being blindsided. As I listened, the anger I felt softened into compassion. I realized he was trying to protect himself from a pain he had experienced as a child. I took his hand and told him that he was not defined by his mother's actions, and I was not the cause of his insecurity. For the first time, he apologized, and we began the slow, arduous work of healing. We learned to trade suspicion for open communication, eventually replacing the questions with genuine conversation. Over the years, people have asked us for the secret to a lasting marriage, expecting a complex answer. I simply tell them that a marriage thrives when partners choose to protect each other rather than win arguments. Whenever I look back at that time of intense scrutiny, I realize the problem was never the details he was checking, but the fear he was nursing. I learned that trust cannot be demanded or unearthed through investigation. It is a gift that begins when you decide to believe in the person standing before you. Ultimately, the greatest act of love is setting aside the need for proof and choosing to believe instead. If these reflections resonate with your own experience, feel free to share your thoughts. If you have ever had to navigate the difficult path of rebuilding trust, your perspective might be the very thing someone else needs to hear today. Remember that the freedom to be heard and the ability to define your own truth are among the most essential parts of building a life of integrity.